Hello and welcome to LFC Focus. So with the Champions League group stage now finally complete and Liverpool having secured their passage through to the knockout stages after that tightly fought win against Napoli on Tuesday night, our thoughts now turn to the draw on Monday morning and who exactly Liverpool will face in the knockout stages of the competition. Now obviously with the fact that we only just got through in second place, it does mean that whatever team Liverpool will face will be one that finished first in their group, which essentially guarantees us a pretty tasty tie in that round of 16. And in this video I'm going to be going through all 6 teams that we could possibly face, the teams that we could get in that draw, and ranking them in terms of the team that I want the least all the way through to the team that I would absolutely love for us to get in that draw. So a little bit on my reasoning and why I've ordered the teams in this way. Personally for me, I'd rather an easier team at this stage of the competition. I know there are people out there who are like, I want one of the big teams, I want a huge European night and stuff like that. But I think there are just a couple of reasons why I'd rather have a smaller team. I mean, there are no small teams in the Champions League, but not one of any of the elite clubs in the Champions League at this stage, simply because, first of all, as we all know, Virgil van Dijk is going to be suspended for the first leg after picking up another yellow card in the game against Napoli, and I think that essentially makes any game that we play difficult, especially if it's away from home. That first leg is going to end up being really tough, and even if it is at home, which I personally would kind of rather because of the whole Van Dijk situation, that does mean we'd have to play the second leg away from home, which is of course never really ideal. So with the Van Dijk suspension coming into it, and also if you ask me, I just think the round of 16, it's a little bit too early for a big team, because I think it's kind of difficult to really judge how big the atmosphere should be, how much the build-up should be for the game, just how big of a game it is, because it's still so far away from the finals, so far away from the business end of the tournament. If you're playing a massive team, it's a little bit of a strange vibe, to be perfectly honest. That seems like a petty reason, but last season I preferred it when we had Porto early on in the round of 16. We knocked them out, and then when we started getting big teams, when we got Manchester City, it was up to the quarter-final stage where the stakes really started to become higher, and all the teams left in the competition start to think about whether or not they can make the final and potentially even lift the trophy. So that's why I personally would rather a smaller team rather than one of the big guns in the Champions League this stage. But getting straight into it, my order, the team that I least want to face in the Champions League knockout stages is Juventus, simply because I think they're probably the most well-balanced team, and I think something that's categorised the Champions League all the way through this group stage is the fact that no team has necessarily emerged as the clear favourites. I don't think any team's had a perfect record. I think most teams have at least dropped points here or there. I think Manchester City are probably one of the teams that have got the most points, and even then they've only got something like 13 or 14, which is pretty impressive, but it just goes to show that no team has like completely pulled away, dominated every side before them, and emerged as the clear favourite. And I think Juventus, simply because of multiple factors, such as they've got star quality in their side, they've got players like Ronaldo, like Dybala, and then other players in and around the team as well in the midfield, and some fantastic defenders in there as well, like Chiellini and Bonucci. To me, just shows that they are not only full of star players, but they're very well balanced as well. They've got a strong attack, a strong defence, a strong midfield. They know how they're going to set up, and they've also got a very stable manager as well. And I think that is something that comes into this whole thing about how some of the teams that usually have been so great have looked a little bit unstable. Real Madrid is the one I'm thinking of, a team that normally is dominant on the European stage. With all the fuss and nonsense about Ronaldo leaving and their manager, they've been thrown into a little bit of a state of turmoil, whereas a team like Juventus have actually just been very, very steady, even though they did lose to young boys last night, and they had that loss against Man U earlier on in the group stage where they were just done by the Jose Mourinho smash and grab. I think apart from that, they have looked reasonably solid, and of course they are tearing up Serie A at the moment. So I'd love to play them. I'd love to knock Cristiano Ronaldo out. I'd love to see us play an incredible away game in Italy in their stadium, but I'd rather we save that for like a quarter-final or a semi-final rather than doing it at this early stage. So Juventus are the team that I want absolutely the least. I really don't want to see them coming out of the hat for us on Monday morning. Coming on to the team that is 5th in my ranking, it is Barcelona, simply because they are never ever an easy team to face. And even though they're not necessarily the sort of free-flowing, incredible, out-of-this-world Barcelona that we've seen in the past with Pep Guardiola, they have still got so much quality in that team, especially going forward. And I just think they'd be too much for our defence, especially without Virgil van Dijk in that first leg as well. Imagine playing at the Nou Camp with like a Lovren Gomez or a Matip Gomez or even a Lovren Matip centre-half pairing. It's terrifying. I don't want us to do that. I'd much rather, and again, Barcelona, a team that I'd love for us to face, especially because there are so many intriguing things about the tactical battle there. For example, I'd love to see how the midfields face off, simply because they've got their wonderful technical midfield. We've got our entirely physical pressing midfield. You know, imagine if we play the midfield of Wijnaldum, Henderson and Milner at the Nou Camp up against all those incredible technical footballers that Barcelona have got. It would be a really, really interesting match. And again, one that I'd love for us to play at some point in the competition. And again, thinking about individual players on the opposition team, I'd love to knock Phil Coutinho out as well. But for the round of 16, given the circumstances and especially the Virgil van Dijk suspension, I'd rather avoid Barcelona at this early stage of the knockout. So then in number 4, I've gone with Real Madrid because, yeah, they've got excellent pedigree. They're still a difficult side to play and they've still got some real quality players in there. I know I mentioned that they are in turmoil at the moment, but for Real Madrid, they're still doing pretty well. They're doing all right in La Liga. No, they're not sort of dominating it. They're already being a little bit adrift at the top of the table, and their Champions League campaign has been less than ideal with those 2 embarrassing defeats to CSKA Moscow. But they've still got some solid players in there, and they're still capable of getting strong results. And also, they're a little bit unpredictable, especially at this stage of the competition, because we've been here before with Real Madrid. They weren't that good at the early stages last season. I remember Ronaldo barely scored any goals in the first half, and suddenly, as it got to the business end, as the knockouts came around, they switched it on and they just bulldozed their way into the final, and they just seem capable of getting results under any circumstance. So it's really difficult to call with Real Madrid. I think if I knew that they were going to still be in turmoil, that they were still going to be a little bit of a mess and they weren't getting the results they needed when it came round to February and we start playing those knockout games, then yeah, I'd absolutely love them. I'd love for us to take Real Madrid down. But there is every chance that they could have sorted themselves out by then. They might have even gotten a new manager. They might even bring in Jose Mourinho. There's a lot of gossip around that at the moment. So for that reason, I wouldn't really like to see Real Madrid at this early stage. But the opportunity for revenge is absolutely fantastic. And again, another team that I'd really like for us to play later on in the competition. So then in at number 3, we're into the teams now that I'd be a little bit more favourable to us drawing. But again, with it being the Champions League knockouts and with us coming second and only facing essentially good teams in this round of 16, there's no team that I think I'm going to be jumping for joy and thinking, yeah, this is solid, we've definitely qualified now. It's Bayern Munich, because they've got some downsides, and I'll come on to those in a wee bit, but they have got an awful lot of big game players in their sides, and that's what I'm thinking about when it comes down to the knockouts. In the group stage, it would have been great to play them, but in the knockouts, a lot of it does come down to your big game intelligence and your ability to manage your way through the games. It worked for Liverpool last season against Man City because we thrived in that intense atmosphere, but I think Bayern Munich are just so good at managing these kind of games, and yeah, you know, they haven't reached a final in a while. They do tend to get knocked out, you know, by other teams in the knockout stages, and they often get knocked out having just not performed as well. But I think at this early stage, they know absolutely what they're doing, or at least the players do. However, they have, of course, got this situation with the manager where there is a lot of uncertainty now. I think they're still wondering whether this Niko Kovac thing is ever actually going to work out or not. And I think a lot of that, again, it's like the Real Madrid thing where whether or not this will be a favourable draw for Liverpool depends where the opposition is come February, because Kovac is that kind of young, youthful manager who's trying to imprint a new style on Bayern Munich. And of course, he's learning on the job as well because it's his first time at a big European club. So it's entirely possible that by February, it's totally fallen apart and Bayern Munich have no chance of beating Liverpool whatsoever. It's also entirely possible that they've got their act together, they're playing the football the manager wants them to play, and they could be an incredible force and maybe even regain their place at the top of the German league. So Bayern would be a very interesting draw. I also think with those experienced big game players they've got, a lot of them are approaching the end of the career. I'm thinking of players like, I think Boateng, who's getting on a little bit, Ribéry definitely, Robben, who's leaving them at the end of the season, and even Lewandowski, you know, is still a fantastic player and is still scoring many, many goals, as we saw last night for them when they played against Ajax, but he isn't necessarily as explosive as he was in the past. So I think Bayern would again be an interesting draw, maybe a bit more of a favourable one than than any of the other elite clubs in this round of 16, but still one that I would feel a little bit nervous about going into the game, especially, like I said, with the whole situation around Virgil van Dijk. I'd really like him in the side when coming up against a top forward like Robert Lewandowski. So in at number 2, we're now into the teams that really, if we did draw, I'd probably be happy about it. I'd say that is a solid draw. That's done well for Liverpool, and I'd back us to make it through to the quarterfinals. My second team that I want to get in the round of 16 is Borussia Dortmund, because it would be an incredibly exciting matchup. There's nothing about a tie between those two teams that wouldn't be fantastic to watch. You've, of course, got Jurgen Klopp's homecoming, which he has kind of already done with those Europa League games, but it's a little bit bigger when it happens on the Champions League stage as well. And, of course, Dortmund are a very, very good side at the moment. They're playing exciting attacking football. They're becoming an emergent force on the European stage as well. They've already claimed a massive scalp with that. I think it was 4-0 win against Atletico Madrid in the group stages. But they're also a little bit unpredictable as well. And they're almost the antithesis of Bayern Munich in that Bayern aren't playing well, but they've got big game players who have that kind of intelligence to manage those games. Dortmund are the opposite, where they're playing well, they're playing nice football, they're getting results, but you just wonder whether a lot of those players haven't quite got the experience in Champions League knockouts. And yep, you could have said that about Liverpool last season. We were in exactly the same boat and we managed to get out of it. Now, whether or not that's because we had emerging, incredible, high-quality, world-class players like Firmino, like Van Dijk, like Mohamed Salah, of course, and plenty of other players in and around that Liverpool side as well, remains to be seen. And I think it would be a fantastic matchup between Borussia Dortmund. But if I had to call it, I'd say that potentially our maturity would probably see us through, because I think Dortmund are great going forward. I'm not entirely sure about their defence. I don't really know how good it is, but from what I can kind of tell from the little I've seen of them this season, they are still a little bit leaky at the back, certainly compared to Liverpool, who are great going forward, and I'm sure we will start to come into our own in the latter half of the season, but also so solid at the back, and I think that's what would potentially tip the game in our favour. So finally, the team that I want most out of all the ones that we could possibly draw in the round of 16, it's got to be Porto, to be honest. And yeah, it's a little bit boring. We played them at this stage last season. We absolutely battered them, and you'd 100% back us to batter them again. But again, I just think the round of 16, there's a reason it's seeded in the way that it is. There's a reason that it's set up so that there's a bias towards the better team, because first place teams in the group always play second place. It's set up so that the best teams will go through, will have relatively easy ties, and can pretty much guarantee their place in the quarterfinals. Now, I know that doesn't really work because we came second and Porto came first, so it kind of denies that rule any sort of credibility. But I do just think they are the weakest out of all the possible teams we could face, and they have got no real standout players. And when it comes to European teams that we don't necessarily know that much about, we don't know about them as a team as a whole, it does come down to the stars. When I think about Juventus, I think about Ronaldo and think I don't fancy them in the round of 16. When it's Barcelona, it's Messi. When it's Real, it's players like Bale and Benzema. When it comes to Porto, there's no one I really look at in that side and think I'm worried about what they could do to us. I look at Porto and I think we can probably do a similar thing to what we did last season. And, you know, last season is a pretty solid blueprint to follow. We made it to the final, so why wouldn't we want a repeat of that? And yeah, like I said, it's a little bit boring, but with the Van Dijk suspension and also with the fact that I don't really want it to disrupt our league campaign at this stage. You know, that our Premier League season is going so well at the moment, but we saw last season what happens when the Champions League schedule starts to get more packed, and when you start to play big teams. You know, those games against Roma and Man City, as great as they were, we had to try so hard to save our squad for those matches that we ended up throwing a fair few Premier League results. Now, I don't want to see us do that if we are in a title challenge, and if we have to play like Juventus and Barcelona and teams like that away from home in February and in early March, then it could be potentially damaging to Liverpool's title challenge. So that's why I'd probably rather have Porto. But at the end of the day, you have to beat what's in front of you. You're always going to face a big team. It's the Champions League after all. And to be honest, I'd still back Liverpool to get a result against pretty much all of the teams that we could possibly face in the knockout. So it's interesting to actually consider before I go that there is actually a slight imbalance in terms of which team we could get. You could think it would be even odds out of all 6 teams, but there is, because of the way the draw is constructed, because of all the rules around first playing second and not playing the team that was in the same group as you, country protection and all that, there's a slight imbalance in terms of the odds, and I'll run them across the bottom of the screen now. But essentially, Dortmund are actually the most likely team Liverpool could draw. Porto are actually the least likely, but as you can see from the numbers on the bottom of the screen, it is all incredibly fine margins. Now, that will all change as we watch the draw, which takes place on Monday at 11 a.m. English time, so that's 12 o'clock noon European time, and I'm not entirely sure about all the other time zones. You'll have to look it up yourself. But essentially, that is when it takes place. We'll find out more as the draw goes on. It's entirely possible that by the time Liverpool come out, there's only 2 possible teams we could face or anything like that. But it's incredibly exciting. I'm going to be watching it live. I'm sure all of you will be incredibly invested in it as well. Let me know down in the comments below who you want to get in this draw, because I'm incredibly interested to find out what other Liverpool fans want. I mean, for me, it's Porto. For most of the people I've sort of spoken to or seen online, it is one of Porto or Dortmund, one of those sort of less elite European clubs. But let me know if you'd love to face Juve, if you'd love to face Barca. Sorry. If you live for those massive European nights, even if they're a bit earlier on in the schedule than we usually expect. But apart from that, don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button there if you're new around here. Check out some of the other videos that have been out on the channel over the past few days. I'll be back later on today with the pre-match content for the game against Man United. Until then, thank you very much for watching. Bye for now.